So our next speaker is Dr. Neil Oxtoby. Neil is from UCL. So over to you, Neil.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? I'm a research associate professor at the UCL Hawkes Institute. I'm a computer scientist, a lapse physicist, and a pretend medical data scientist, representing Alex Young, who's in a very similar career stage. And I'm going to breeze through this so that we've got time for Junhao's recorded talk. This is essentially an open software success story. Some of the work is ours, some of the work is others. And it's all about unraveling heterogeneous disease trajectories in the sort of framework of subtypes, so towards precision medicine. And largely the work of Alexandra Young, who has no relevant disclosures. So disease progression, we all know it's heterogeneous. We've seen some great talks this morning about this. And the point of trying to understand and help the individual patient is to understand and unravel that heterogeneity, which can give us insight into disease mechanisms, or it can provide clinical utility. Those two things should be two of the key primary goals of unraveling heterogeneity. So we know that disease progression is temporal heterogeneity, these stereotypical stages of Alzheimer's disease progression at post-mortem have shown variation among individual patients, as they have done in vivo in brain imaging. The good thing is we can do a data-driven approach to this temporal progression. We've got something called data-driven disease progression modeling, which can work from individual snapshots like photographs, biomarker photographs, if you will, of disease and individual patients, and try to piece those together into a longitudinal movie of disease progression. So it learns the disease timeline as well as the disease progression pattern jointly. Clustering can help with heterogeneity. At the cross-sectional level, you can find subgroups that look similar to each other. This is unsupervised learning. You just compare samples. The ones that are the most similar under a given criteria end up in the same subgroup. And we've seen this in Alzheimer's disease in vivo as well. The problem is that clustering has no sense of time, of disease progression. Assumes everyone, essentially, implicitly or explicitly, assumes everyone's at the same stage of disease. And this data-driven disease progression modeling approaches typically don't assume that there's any subtype. If you go into a picture, put together a movie from a bunch of photographs, you typically have to assume that those photographs are of the single process as opposed to multiple processes. So during Alex's PhD at UCL, she invented the Subtype and Stage Inference algorithm, or SUSTAIN, which merged clustering and data-driven disease progression modeling. It finds clusters of disease progression from possibly cross-sectional data. So this is the underlying model, two progression trajectories in this cartoon, but the actual measurements down here in panel B are individual snapshots from a large cohort. The cool thing is once you've got that trained model, you can take new photographs of individual biomarker profiles and assign subtypes and stages. So these can be have stratification and also temporal, the stages benefits, which have predictive utility. In Alex's original paper in Nature Communications 7 years ago now, it doesn't feel that long ago, in Alzheimer's disease, he found 3 subtypes, which are labeled based on the earliest affected and most affected regions. So a typical looking atrophy pattern, these are all brain volumes, regional brain volumes, cortical and subcortical. The individual progression patterns by themselves don't have a particular ability to stratify patients except temporally, which does have some benefits, and clustering can't help with any longitudinal predictions. So SUSTAIN now exists and it's been used by many, many people. There's some multiple progression models underneath the hood. Nick Firth and I invented a non-parametric version of the event-based model. They can use cross-sectional data from all sorts of different data types, cognitive test scores, non-Gaussian things. Maris Doreus enabled missing data to be used. So if you have a cohort with multimodal data and some people didn't have a cognitive test, some people didn't have a brain scan, those people can still contribute to the group level subtype and stage inference. And Alex invented the ordinal SUSTAIN, which is an event-based model under the hood of the clustering in SUSTAIN that can handle visual ratings, discrete ordinal type of data. So if you've got a different kind of data, you can basically run it through SUSTAIN. Also in the original paper, Alex ran it on the GenFi dataset, And the cool thing here is brain volumes went in, 4 subtypes were discovered, and they had a really nice alignment to the genotype of this genetic frontotemporal dementia data set. The asymmetric frontal atrophy pattern that Sustain discovered was strongly aligned to progranulin mutations. The temporal subtype was strongly aligned to the MAPT group, and the frontotemporal and subcortical subtypes aligned with the C9orf72 expansion genotype. Later on, a couple of years later, when Genfi had twice the sample size, Alex looked at it again and split the temporal subtype into a temporal and another frontotemporal, which aligned with more specific mutations within MAPT, which is really cool. So you can get genetic information just from this algorithm and brain volumes. Jake Vogel assembled the world's largest tau PET data set at the time, almost 2,000 individuals across a couple of traces, across 4 or 5 studies, I believe. We worked with him on getting this to work, found 4 subtypes of the spread of tau PET in the brain. This is all cross-sectional data again, which showed differing clinical and biological profiles that had predictive utility. They were consistent at follow-up, so individuals tended to just get worse, more advanced stage, but they stayed in the same subtype, thereby validating the longitudinal picture that this cross-sectional data revealed with the algorithm. Beyond Alzheimer's disease, Armin Ashagi, who's also at UCL, applied this on a massive data set of multiple sclerosis patients from 15 clinical trials and a few observational studies. Completely held out about a third of that data. Found 3 MRI-based subtypes based on lesions and brain volumes with distinct disability progression and differential treatment response. The ability to predict treatment response from a couple of brain scans in multiple sclerosis. I presented some work yesterday on Alzheimer's disease where we found a similar thing, brain volumes, and we could predict differential treatment response in the A4 study, phase 3 clinical trial of solanezumab. Okay. Alex and Jake got together again and looked at some TDP43 pathology, and they found multiple subtypes in ALS and FTD, and only a single group in the late pathology group. It's typically an older version of Alzheimer's. There were subtypes within the first 2 and only 1 type in the third. The diagnostic correlation, this is pathological data, neuropathological post-mortem, between the subgroups found by Sustain and the actual diagnoses was something like 92% accuracy. And then they compared this to existing staging schema as well. Found a nice strong correlation between Sustain on the vertical axis and the staging schemes in neuropathology post-mortem, and also in the unclassifiable post-mortem cases where it didn't line up with the stereotypical pattern. They found this Sustain was able to find a useful stage of pathology because it discovered a unique subtype trajectory. Sophie Mastenbroek looked at alpha-synuclein pathologies, found a few different subtypes there, and evidence for a brain-first and a body-first subtype in these synucleinopathies, like Parkinsonian disorders, for example. And as I mentioned, it's a sort of an open source software success story. There have been many wider applications, including major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, lung disease, knee osteoarthritis, epilepsy, and we've, of course, wouldn't be in this group if we hadn't applied it to UK Biobank, not shown here. So subtypes of aging as well. So this has all been based on cross-sectional data going into Sustain with the disease progression modeling estimating the longitudinal or pseudo-time trajectories within the subgroups. But we've got some extensions more recently, temporal event-based model and temporal Sustain. Peter Wijratny invented a hidden Markov model-based version. So instead of just having a sequence and a stage of progressive pathology within your disease progression model, you now have an estimate of transition times between those stages, and that's what we're visualizing here. Alex and Leon Axman then extended that to work within Sustain, so you can now have temporal Sustain, i.e. the subtypes you get also have an estimate of transition times between stages, enabling you to do even more predictions with this heterogeneity stratification tool. Alex has recently applied this stuff to Alzheimer's disease, finding that transition times on the vertical axis here at earlier stages are quite long, which reflects the amyloid and tau buildup in Alzheimer's disease, which is quite slow. And then in later stages, this accelerates and everything falls to pieces. Lawrence Binding in our group has been working on additional pathology, so simultaneously modeling multiple pathologies to try to understand even more of the heterogeneity. Adipath starts by running sustain, in this case on tau PET, and then runs sustain again on regional atrophy data to try to soak up some of the additional variance that's left. And he's found, so the additional variance that's not explained by the tau. He found 4 subtypes of tau PET, just like in Jake's work, and then found an additional 3 subtypes of limbic parietal and orbitofrontal. These had different clinical profiles. The short story is that the limbic predominant version was older and looked like the late clinical profile, and more advanced clinical decline as well. It's all available. Download the code, have a go. There's Jupyter notebooks, YouTube tutorials, a wealth of evidence. We can send you these slides if you like. Haven't had much time, do get in touch with me, very happy to chat. It takes a village. The UCL Pond Group is a great place to work and we're hiring, so do come and chat to us. Thank you.